What's going on, guys? I'm Frank with Ratchet and Frank TV. Today we're going to be doing a quick teardown of this 2003 KTM450SX-F. I'm going to be going over some issues that the bike has, as well as pulling the carburetor and cleaning it for you guys. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Real quickly, I'm going to show you guys the idea behind reverse bleeding the slave cylinder back up into the master cylinder for the hydraulic clutch. This will allow you to get any air out of the system and assure that your clutch is responsive. So a couple of you are probably laughing at me after I use the word flavor injector when talking about a hydraulic clutch. However, this is what I was talking about. I guess you fill this with seasoning or something and you inject it into a bird or a prime rib or something that gives it flavor. Honestly, I'm not too sure. But what I use it for is I'll fill it with hydraulic oil or mineral oil, 100% mineral oil, and we'll go where the banjo bolt sits, we'll unscrew the banjo bolt, and we'll send the fluid back up through the lines, and it'll come out the master cylinder with any air that was inside the lines. And if you know these hydraulic clutches or any fluid lines in general, if there's air inside them, inside the closed system, they're not going to function as intended, and it'll lead to problems. So that's a flavor injector. It's a great tool to have if you're working on these bikes that have hydraulic clutches and you need to reverse bleed. This one is a vacuum bleeder. This one is more intended for brake use, but it's still a great tool to have. You could buy them like this and they'll come with, you buy them at AutoZone, Pep Boys, shit like that. You could get them with the kits that have these little cylinders that also come with fittings and stuff. I'll use these fittings even when I'm using this flavor injector. I'll use those fittings to meet my needs. So these are great things to have. But anyway, we'll take them over to the bike and I'll show you what I meant by injecting hydraulic oil. So this is something entirely for another video, to be honest, but I'll quickly show you guys what I meant. On this model, a 2003 KTM450SX-F, this chain guard is bolted into the slave cylinder as well via this guy. But what I mentioned is the banjo bolt right here. We could loosen it up and we could use one of our fittings and our flavor injector filled with hydraulic fluid or hydraulic oil, and we could slip it onto the banjo bolt here with the banjo bolt loosened up so it's allowing fluid to pass through, and we could send our fluid back up through the lines. Now the point of this is we're pushing air out of the lines and removing it from the system entirely, and it'll come out of the master cylinder in the form of bubbles. And then we could fill up normally the master cylinder, pull our injector off here, and tighten the bolt back up, and we should have a functioning brake or a functioning hydraulic clutch. Let's talk about tearing down one of these carbureted bikes. First thing to do is take the seat off, then the fuel tank, then we can pull the subframe off with the air boot, and then we can gain access to the carburetor. From there, I'll show you guys how to clean the carburetor up. So when you're taking these carburetors off, first it helps to see that this notch right here, this metal notch, or rather this aluminum notch, is what's holding it in place on the rubber boot. Now I like to leave this rubber boot attached to the head and disconnect the carburetor at this clamp right here. But in order to do that, you have to make sure this back clamp is adequately tightened, and this front clamp is the one you're loosening. So let's loosen this front clamp up a little bit. So a quick little bit about how these dual throttle cables work. These two cables go ahead and they span the outside of this ring right here. And they're clipped on just as they are inside here, up here. So when we crank the throttle, the cables are being pulled in their corresponding directions. So as we pull the throttle, the bottom cable is pulled towards us, and the top cable is pushed away from us, and the spring behind the plate returns them. And this opens the butterfly inside. Now with our carburetor opened up and all our breather tubes removed and out of the way, we can kind of start looking at the internals and how clean these are. Now, this is our main jet, this is our needle jet, and this is our idle jet. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna remove them real quick. Let's go ahead and remove the float so we can get deeper access to the carburetor. Now the float is held on by a pin. The pin's very loose in this one. The float is held on by a pin right here. Now, if you take a punch and just slip this pin out, it'll come out the other side. You could pull the pin, and you can see the float will come loose. Then you can pull the float out with the needle. Now we want to inspect the needle and make sure the needle isn't worn down or damaged. Now that's a good needle. Now these old guys have a decompression switch on them, and they're known for being quite a bitch to get started. However, before I go any further, I want to point something out to you guys. Now you can see the carburetor is actually dripping fuel. Now, I definitely think this is because one of the screws was stripped when one of the threads was actually stripped on the inside of the carburetor. And it was probably due to the previous owner over cranking on them. You gotta be really careful on these guys, or you will do exactly that. You'll ruin the threads. So in a little bit, we'll pull this back apart. We'll take it over in the shop, and we'll actually rethread that, and I'll show you guys how we go about fixing that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and let's get this guy started. The key when doing this is to hold the front brake so you're not cranking on the throttle, because if you gas the bike, you're gonna flood the engine. So what we want to do is we want to find as hard as our compression is going to get here. Just about right there. We want to flip the switch once, and we want to kick it over. So let's see if we can't get it going. Alright guys, so we have the carburetor back off the bike here. Keep the actual subframe off for this. This is just a quick test. Just put the tank on, attach the line. We're just gonna flip it. Now, if we see any fumes coming out of these cracks, crevices right here, we know that it's leaking, but as we can see, there's nothing. So we know that we've stopped the leak. Now, before on camera, I'd actually done this, and I noticed that there was a little bit of fuel leaking out of the inlet. Now, what I did is I unscrewed this back screw right here. I pulled the inlet out, and the inlet itself actually had a little bit of dirt on its 3 seals. And so I just wiped it off literally with my thumb, stuck it back in and re-secured it, and now it's all good. So let's go ahead, let's put the subframe back on, let's get the seat on, and let's go ahead and fire it up, and let's hear this thing go. Now let's go ahead and find top dead center and meet the maximum compression limit. Flip the lever one time. There we go. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time on Ratchet and Frank TV.